All right, thank you. Hello, this is Pumpkin Spice, also known as Tim Norton, manager of software consulting, and I'm also presenting with Ian D'Amelio, senior technology consultant and tech genius. So we're here to talk to you guys today about Sage Intacct, smart rules, and smart events. One of my favorite features of Sage Intacct. The objectives for this session: by the end of the session today, you should be able to identify when to use smart rules versus smart events, explain how you can enforce your data validation using smart rules, write a conditional smart rule to make your data validation more dynamic, create a smart event API call to populate data from one entry screen to another, and review the smart event jobs log to check smart events queued and view history. So first things first, you can't do things in Intacct unless you have permissions to do them. I'm sure everyone knows that. So in order to use smart rules and smart events, there are some minimum subscriptions you need, all of which are part of the core. So you need to have access to the core, which is AR, AP, GL, and so forth, web services, and either platform services or customization services. In terms of permissions, you need to be a limited or full admin. You need to have permissions for everything in the company module, and you need to have permissions in platform services or customization services. And I will be including an appendix to this slide deck, which you guys will be able to access later. And this is going to have some more detailed information on several of the areas that we're going to talk about. So first up, smart rules versus smart events. For those of you who don't know what either one is, you're about to learn. For those of you who know what they are and you're a little bit hazy on what's the difference, I'm going to cover that. So this slide here talks about smart rules versus smart events. The key differences here are smart rules are going to generate a message. Smart events are actually going to do something, a follow-on action. So smart rules are generally conditions that you're defining to generate an error message. So it can be something like generating a message that something they're doing might be wrong. We call that a warning. Or it could be stopping someone from performing an action. We call that an error. So examples of something like this are, if somebody codes something to a cost of goods sold account, they have to use a projects type department. We can create that kind of logic if that's your business logic. We can say if somebody creates a vendor and they didn't fill in the tax ID field, generate a warning. Maybe there's a reason they didn't put it in, but you want to make them stop and think about it. And if they look at that warning, they can still click save and carry on creating that vendor, but it's a good check to make sure that somebody thinks about what they're doing, especially if you have people who are prone to rushing or who are overworked, which is very common in the accounting and finance world. Then you have smart events. So smart events take action when a condition is met. So there are 4 things we can do with smart events. We can send an email when a certain event occurs. So I used to have a VP of finance who wanted to get a copy of every single time somebody saved a sales invoice. So we created a smart event that would email him a copy of the invoice as a PDF so that somebody didn't have to remember to go and save that when they were done. It can post information to an HTTP site. That's useful for developer types or for some external integrations. It can perform an internal API call, which means an API call within your Sage Intacct instance. So that's really powerful. That can do things like if you enter a new address or something on a vendor invoice in a certain field, you can have that address populate somewhere else. You can have things like certain information about a project being stored on a sales order. Say we've got a new project, reference or a new project contact. We can push all that information to the project object. So API calls move information inside of your Sage Intacct instance to help you reduce manual entry. You can also use API calls to create follow-on transactions if you want to get fancy. You can create AP bills, you can create journal entries, a lot of options there. We've done a lot of really powerful and cool stuff with that. And then finally, you can write information to a log. And, one of the most simple examples of writing to a log concept is something like the audit log. You can create an audit log report and just have Intacct log all this stuff for you. It's a very common use. So let's talk about the different kinds of smart rules that you can run across. There's 2 different kinds that you can run across and use. There's what I call the regular smart rule, which means the condition is the rule that needs to be met so that an error or warning message is not sent. So your condition for a regular SMART rule would be 1099 tax ID is not blank. So if that tax ID is not blank, then an error message will not be sent. If that tax ID is blank, you're going to get an error message that says, please fill in this tax ID. And then you've got a conditional SMART rule. Conditional SMART rule is really good for people who are used to writing if-then statements in Excel. So you can write a statement that says, is this tax ID blank? If yes, generate an error message. If no, do nothing. Two different ways of doing it, and we'll see some of that kind of stuff in demo. And there's also further information about this in the appendix to this slide deck. And then when we talk about SMART events, as I said before, we've got 4 different action possibilities. So SMART events, just to note here, the most common uses that we generally see for SMART events are either sending an email or performing an internal API call. But the conditions that we can have in a SMART event, so a condition means the rule that's going to be met so the action is executed. So here you're saying, if the tax ID is filled in, do one of these follow-up actions. Or if this invoice is greater than $1,000, send an email to someone. All those kinds of things can be determined by a SMART event, and if your condition is true, then your SMART event is going to execute. So as I said, you can do an email. If you do an email, all you really need to specify is the email recipient and what the content is of your email message. So you can dynamically pull that email recipient. Maybe it's a project-related SMART event. You can actually look at and tell Intacct, take the project manager, email them, and then you can specify in the body of the email whatever you want it to say. An API action, you need to specify the body of the API call. We can see that in the appendix, but basically it's just entering in the different arguments for the fields that you want to be completed. And then there's a logging action, which means you don't really have anything extra to specify, but the system is going to log it. In the HTTP post, you need to specify your method or your arguments. Again, that's something that more of the developer people tend to be into, but we do have additional information on that if you find it helpful. Next, I wanted to mention the SMART Event Jobs queue. So the SMART Event Jobs queue is in the company admin menu. It was released in 2019, release 2. And you may have updated your permissions since then and picked this up, but if you have not, just go check your permissions. It's available as long as you give yourself permissions to it under company. And what it does is the SMART Event Jobs queue gives you insight into all the SMART events that have fired in your system and whether they worked or not. And if they did not work, you'll see an explanation as to why, so that you can troubleshoot your SMART events and make sure that they're not failing again going forward. Just again, as I said, make sure you have permissions to see it, or it's not going to do you much good. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Ian for a little bit so that Ian can do some demo of these SMART rules and SMART events in action.
Just shared my screen here, so you should see my Intacct demo company. And to start with, we're going to just walk through a quick example of how to create a SMART rule, and then we'll look at some pre-built SMART events and SMART rules and how they work. So to start with, I'll go up to my menu and navigate to Platform Services and then SMART Rules. And we'll click Add to start a new SMART rule. And for our first example, we'll look at something simple like requiring that you enter a category when you're creating a GL account. So for those of you that have worked with the financial reports, you'll know that all of the built-in financial reports are based on categories on GL accounts. So oftentimes you want to make sure that if someone adds a new account, you don't want them to forget to pick a category. So our first step, we're going to pick the object that we're adding the rule to. So in this case, it'll be the GL account. And then we'll go to the next step. And the first thing we'll pick is whether it's going to be an error or a warning. So in our case, we don't want someone to be able to skip past this restriction, so we'll keep it at error. And then we'll just add the events. So whenever someone adds or updates a GL account, we want to make sure that our rule is in place. And the next step is the condition, and this is where we define what we're trying to validate on. Something that they've added recently up here in the top right is this field lookup option. So if I click that, it will give me a pop-up box that lets me see all of the fields and related fields on the GL account. So if I wanted to know what the correct merge field is for category, all I have to do is click the checkbox next to category and then click OK. And you can see it's filled in this merge field, so I don't have to go look it up or remember what it's called. And then lastly, I'll just fill in my condition. So we want to say that the category is not blank, so we'll just put in not equals and a blank string. And lastly, we'll give the error message that the user will see when they've tried to save their object and it didn't work. So we'll say something like, you must pick a category. And then we'll move on to the next step. And all we have to do is give it a name. So maybe require category. And then save. So now if we go over to our general ledger accounts list and try to add a new account, and we won't pick a category, so you can see there's no red asterisk, which means it's usually not required by the system. We'll go ahead and try to save it anyway. And now we've got an error that says the require category rule was not met, and you must pick a category. So we can go back, pick our dropdown, pick a category, and then try to save again. And you can see it let us through since we met the condition. Next, we can look at maybe a slightly more complex rule. So Jim mentioned something like this earlier. Let's say you have, you want a restriction where if someone is picking a cost of goods sold account, you don't want them to pick a department that wouldn't make sense, say marketing. So I've already put this one together, and we'll just walk through it. So our owner object will be the AP bill detail. So that means the entry rows on an AP bill. And whenever someone adds or updates one of these rows, we want to meet this condition. So our condition is that if the department is 400, so that's our marketing department, and the account number is between 5,000 and 6,000, so our cost of goods sold account numbers, then we don't want this to be allowed. And you can see down here under the error message, you can fill in some of these merge fields. So when the user tries to save this transaction, they'll see that it says specifically which account number and which line number on their transaction is causing the error. Right. So if we go look at our bills list, and I've got one that I saved as a draft earlier. So now if I try to pick one of my 5,000 accounts for cost of goods sold, and if my department is marketing, we'll try to submit this. You can see the error. It says that the account 5100 can't be used with department 400, and to change the line number 2 to have a different account or department. So I'll go back here, and I'll just pick a different department. And you can see it let me go through. So next, we'll take a look at some examples of smart events. So what we looked at before were rules that contain your business logic or things to help people not make mistakes. The next thing we'll look at is how to transfer data around the system with a smart event. So I'll go back to my menu under Platform Services and then Smart Events. And the first one we'll look at is let's say when you enter a new sales order for a project, you want it to then go and back to the project and update the budgeted billing amount. So we'll go take a look at our projects list first. And let's say we take this project here, test project, and look at the additional info. And we'll scroll down to, the summary. And we'll scroll down to the budgeted billing amount, and we can see that it's 0. And then we'll take a look at our smart event. And we'll see that we've just created a smart event on order entry transaction of type sales order. So whenever someone enters a new sales order, this event will run. And we can see we've picked the API. So this is the internal API call that Jim was talking about earlier. And it runs whenever there is a project on that sales order. So where the project ID is not blank. And here's an example of what these internal API calls look like. Again, you've got some documentation in the slides that you can go to see how to create these, and then the same field lookup and such on this page to be able to help you insert the right fields. So we'll just save out of here and then take a look at how that works. So when we go to add a new sales order, and I'll just pick this one right here. And we'll copy it to a new one. So we've got a new sales order in here. We've picked a project, so the same project we looked at earlier. And we've got some line items on here, so we'll just fill in some values here. So our total for our sales order on this project, sales order is 3538. So we'll post that. So we've got a new sales order, number 17. And now we'll go back to our project and look at our project again. And we'll take a look at the summary again. And you can see that the budgeted billing amount is now the same value as our sales order. So that's kind of an example of how you can move data from one area of the system to another automatically. And then lastly, we also have a smart event on the same transaction that demonstrates how the emails work. So if we look at this, the setup here at the start is the same. So whenever someone adds a sales order, but in this case, we're going to have an action of email instead of API. And then everything else is the same. And here we've just added an example of an email. So I should have received an email to my email address with the subject new sales order. I've chosen to attach a PDF, so we should be able to see the PDF of that sales order. And I put some summary information about the order as well. So I'll get the total, the date, who added it, and so on. And then a link if I wanted to drill back into Intacct and see it, the rest of the information. So I will switch to my email. Okay, so here's the email. You can see my summary, so the total amount and the date and so on. I can click and see the PDF right here. And then if I had wanted to go directly back to Intacct, I could click on the link.
How to learn more? I know this is a topic. Sometimes people are a little bit scared of smart rules and smart events because they can be a little bit intimidating at first. So I've included a lot of information on how to learn more, which you will have access to. So we have some previous Cloud Bites on the topic. There's also great documentation for both smart rules and smart events in the Sage Intacct Help Center, complete with fleshed out examples in detail about how to write some of those condition statements that we were looking at and where to go for even more help on that. There's the Sage Intacct developer site. So for that example where Ian was pushing information, from a sales order onto a project, there's actually kind of ready-built API calls that you can find in the developer site, and all you really have to do is tweak a line or two, and you're ready to go. So it's pretty much turnkey. It's not something that we've necessarily gone and dreamed up on our own. We applied it and made some creative ways to make use of that, but the bones of what we need are there for us to use. And then there's also a tools and library. So there's actually a really good customization services sheet available in this tools and libraries, and it allows you to see how you make use of all the different shortcuts that are available in Intacct with your keyboard. And then finally, of course, you can always contact us at our ERP support email address if you need help with building any kinds of smart rules or smart events.